Hey, welcome. Today, we're going to talk about something fascinating, the surprisingly biological world of a high-tech machine, the fuel cell. We're going to explore how this piece of tech basically has to breathe to stay alive, and, what happens when it can't. So I want you to think of a fuel cell not as some cold metal box, but more like an elite athlete. Seriously, every ounce of its power, its endurance, it all comes down to one critical thing: how it manages the gases flowing in and out. Its performance is tied directly to how well it breathes. Which kind of begs the question, right? How does a machine even breathe? What's it taking in? What's it pushing out? And maybe more importantly, what happens if it chokes? Or even worse, what if it starts to drown? All right, let's get into it. A PEM fuel cell, that stands for proton exchange membrane, is really a beautiful piece of engineering. You feed it hydrogen, it grabs oxygen from the air we breathe, and through this amazing chemical reaction, it makes electricity. And the only thing that comes out the tailpipe? Pure water. Simple, clean, powerful. But keeping it that way, well, that's where the secret lies. So, here's our game plan. First, we're going to look at the nitrogen problem, how the cell can literally choke on air. Then we'll get into the water problem, the very real danger of drowning in its own exhaust. After that, we'll open up the engineering playbook to see how they fix these things. And finally, we'll see the delicate balancing act that keeps it all running just right. Okay, so let's tackle our first big challenge. It's like an invisible poison. See, the fuel cell needs oxygen to work, but the air around us isn't pure oxygen, right? It's almost 80% nitrogen. And that nitrogen, well, it can cause some pretty big problems. Here's what goes down. A tiny bit of that nitrogen from the air intake actually seeps across the membrane over to the hydrogen fuel side. Now, nitrogen is inert. It's lazy. It doesn't do anything in the reaction, so it just hangs out. It builds up, it takes up space, and it starts watering down the pure hydrogen fuel. And as that nitrogen concentration gets higher and higher, the fuel cell is starved of the hydrogen it needs, and its power output, its voltage, just starts to tank. And this really gets to the heart of the science. It's related to something called the Nernst equation, but the bottom line is simple. As the effective concentration, or what scientists call the partial pressure, of hydrogen goes down, so does the cell's voltage. If it gets really bad, parts of the cell can actually start to experience hydrogen starvation, and that can cause some serious permanent damage. So how does our athlete clear its lungs of this bad air? It takes a quick, sharp exhale. And the fuel cell does pretty much the exact same thing. A valve on the hydrogen side just pops open for a split second, venting out all that useless nitrogen and letting fresh, pure hydrogen rush back in. It's called the purge. Simple as that. But, clearing out nitrogen is only half the story. Remember how we said the only thing that comes out is water? Well, that's fantastic for the planet, but it creates a second, just as dangerous problem for the fuel cell itself: the risk of drowning. See, over on the other side of the cell, the oxygen side, that electrochemical reaction is constantly making water. Now, some water is good. It's actually essential to keep the whole system hydrated. But too much of a good thing, yeah, that can go south really, really fast. And here's the kicker. Thanks to Faraday's law of electrolysis, we know there's a direct link. The more power or current you pull from the fuel cell, the more water it makes. So when our athlete is sprinting, going all out at peak performance, that's exactly when it's at the biggest risk of flooding itself. This flooding happens when liquid water starts to clog up the tiny, microscopic pores in a part called the gas diffusion layer. Think of it like trying to breathe through a wet sponge. That layer is supposed to let oxygen get to the catalyst, but if it's waterlogged, the oxygen just can't get through. The cell can't breathe in, it suffocates, and boom, another massive drop in voltage. So the solution here is just as straightforward. You gotta drain it. The system needs a way to get rid of this excess liquid water, to clear the pipes so that oxygen can get back to doing its job. Okay, so we know we need to purge and drain, but how? Knowing that you need to do it is one thing, but knowing exactly when and how, well, that's the real engineering magic. And over the years, engineers have come up with a whole playbook of strategies, from dead simple to mind-blowingly complex. This is what I find so cool. You can see how the thinking evolved. You could start with a really basic, time-based purge. Just open the valve every, say, 10 seconds. It works, but it's pretty wasteful. So a smarter way is to link the purge to how much power you're actually using, but the really cutting-edge systems. They use sensors to watch the cell's voltage, or even have a computer model that predicts the perfect moment to purge for maximum efficiency. And it's a similar story for drain strategies. You could just do a periodic drain, open a valve on a timer. Or you could get a little smarter and use a sensor that actually measures the pressure difference across the cell. When those little pores get clogged with water, the pressure changes, and that sensor can trigger the drain at the exact right moment. It's reactive, not just scheduled. So, as you can see, it's not just about opening and closing valves. It is a constant, delicate balancing act. This is the big dilemma for every fuel cell engineer. How do you optimize the breathing without wrecking the overall performance? And here is that trade-off in a nutshell. If you don't purge enough, you're going to starve the cell of hydrogen. That means voltage drops and maybe even permanent damage. But if you purge too often, you're literally just throwing away unspent hydrogen fuel. That's a direct hit to your efficiency, to your fuel economy. It's this tightrope walk between keeping the cell healthy and not being wasteful. So, what's the big takeaway here? Let's boil it down. Purging and draining aren't just chores. They are the active breathing of the fuel cell. Purging stops it from choking on nitrogen. Draining stops it from drowning in water. And nailing this rhythm with smart, adaptive controls is absolutely everything when it comes to making a fuel cell that's powerful, long-lasting, and super efficient. And that brings us to one last really interesting thought. We've gone from simple timers to complex computer models. So what's next? The logical step feels like artificial intelligence, right? Could you have a learning algorithm watching thousands of data points in real time that could finally create the perfectly breathing fuel cell for any situation, one that adapts more like a living thing than a machine? That's a pretty exciting question for the future of energy.